Welcome to Part 3 of Dependent Adult Abuse for Mandatory Reporters. This section of the course will cover reporting suspected abuse, investigation, and preventing abuse. Let's get started. Part 5. Reporting suspected abuse. The underreporting of abuse was mentioned earlier in the course. Reasons for underreporting include family secrecy. Families can be very private. They may believe that their affairs are no one else's business. Shame. Shame on the part of another family member who is aware of the abuse, the victim, or even the abuser may hinder reporting of abuse. Isolation. The victim seldom leaves the home or has visitors. They may have no family or anyone they can trust to tell about the abuse. Self-blame. Victims may suffer from low self-esteem. A victim may believe they deserve the abuse, believing if he or she had been a better parent or a better resident, the abuse would not be happening. Fear. Fear of the abuser or having to move into a healthcare facility or away from their home may deter reporting. The abuser may fear legal repercussions. Embarrassment. Embarrassment may be on both sides, victim for having succumbed to abuse and the abuser for his or her own actions. Of course, one of the main reasons for the underreporting of abuse is that the general public lacks understanding and awareness about the presence of dependent adult abuse. Mandatory reporters are people who have been identified as having knowledge and experience working with persons known to be at risk for abuse. By law, it means that, in the course of employment, they examine, attend, counsel, or treat a dependent adult. They reasonably believe that a dependent adult has suffered abuse. Examples of mandatory reporters include health professionals, social workers, police officers, and care review committee members. By virtue of our mission and industry, all staff at Stonehill Franciscan Services are mandatory reporters. As a mandatory reporter, you must report abuse, even if you only suspect abuse is taking place. Once you make a report of suspected abuse, you cannot be held responsible for the abuse. But if you choose not to make a report of suspected abuse, your responsibility will be far greater than if you had made the report and it was later determined by investigators not to be abuse. If you see something, you must, by law, say something. A person participating in good faith in reporting or cooperating with or assisting the department in evaluating a case of dependent adult abuse has immunity from liability, civil or criminal, which might otherwise be incurred or imposed based upon the act of making the report or giving the assistance. The person has the same immunity with respect to participating in good faith in a judicial proceeding resulting from the report or cooperation or assistance or relating to the subject matter of the report, cooperation, or assistance. What this means is, when you report your suspicion of dependent adult abuse, you are protected by law from any negative job-related consequences, just as you are protected by law from any liability, civil or criminal. Any mandatory reporter who knowingly and willfully fails to report suspected dependent adult abuse is guilty of a simple misdemeanor, with 30 days in jail and/or a $500 fine. The reporter is also civilly liable for damages caused by that failure to report. Any mandatory reporter who knowingly reports false information about abuse is guilty of a simple misdemeanor also, 30 days in jail and/or a $500 fine. So remember, it's a crime if you are a mandatory reporter, abuse occurred while you were on the job, and you knowingly and willingly chose not to report it. As the definition states, a permissive reporter is anyone other than a mandatory reporter who suspects dependent adult abuse. This includes the general public. A permissive reporter also is a mandatory reporter who suspects dependent adult abuse but became aware of that information outside of their employment. If you suspect abuse is taking place in the community, contact the Department of Human Services, DHS, at 1-800-362-2178. The DHS social worker will ask a number of questions and assist you in completing Form 470-2441 so that your suspicions are recorded in writing. You must also make a report in writing within 48 hours after your oral report. DHS will contact the Central Abuse Registry to request information about previous reports involving the same person or persons. Law enforcement officials may be called if necessary. DHS will make contact with the victim within 24 hours and begin an investigation. The investigation will be completed within 20 days. Upon completion of the investigation, the DHS social worker will classify the abuse in one of 4 ways. Mandatory reporters employed by a facility or agency should follow the reporting guidelines set by that agency. However, the facility's policies cannot interfere with the person making the report as set out by Iowa Code 235B. Reporting abuse in a CC village. If you suspect abuse is taking place or have witnessed abuse, contact the Assisi Village Director at extension 1196 immediately. If the director is unavailable, contact the Stonehill Administrator. In the absence of the administrator, contact your house supervisor. Do not wait. Report your suspicions immediately. DHS will contact the Central Abuse Registry to request information about previous reports involving the same person or persons. Law enforcement officials may be called if necessary. DHS will make contact with the victim within 24 hours and begin an investigation. The investigation will be completed within 20 days. Reporting abuse at the health center. If you suspect abuse is taking place or have witnessed abuse, contact the Stonehill Administrator at extension 1132 immediately. If the administrator is unavailable, contact your house supervisor. Do not wait. Report your suspicions immediately. Within 5 days of the event, the administrator will complete an internal investigation. The Department of Inspections and Appeals, or DIA, will contact the Central Abuse Registry to request information about previous reports involving the same person or persons. Law enforcement officials may be called if necessary. DIA will make contact with the victim within 20 days and begin an investigation. Part 6. Investigation. In order for DHS or DIA to conduct an evaluation of an abusive situation, the following criteria must be met. The victim must be a dependent adult. An offense must have been committed under the Dependent Adult Abuse Law, an allegation of abuse. The alleged perpetrator must be a caretaker or self. If the case does not meet all 3 of these conditions, you do not have dependent adult abuse under Iowa Code 235B. You might, however, have a different criminal offense depending on the situation. When you are wondering about whether or not to report, consider the need for the 3 criteria. However, it is the role of every mandatory reporter to report suspected abuse, and it is the role of the department to determine if abuse has occurred. Who investigates reports of dependent adult abuse? Abuse involving the Assisi Village is investigated by the Department of Human Services, DHS. Abuse involving the health center is investigated by the Department of Inspections and Appeals, DIA. The conclusion of the investigation is based on an evaluation of all the information gathered during the investigation. If the abuse was performed by a caretaker, it will be classified in one of three possible ways: founded, unfounded, or confirmed not registered. If the abuse was self-inflicted, the report is classified as an assessment and kept in the local DHS office. If an investigation of dependent adult abuse is classified as founded, it means that the investigator determined a preponderance of evidence, more than 50%, indicated the abuse occurred. That report is kept in the Central Abuse Registry for 10 years and then sealed. These are the only reports that are listed on the Central Abuse Registry. If an investigation of dependent adult abuse is classified as confirmed, not registered, it means the investigator determined by a preponderance of evidence, more than 50%, that the physical abuse or denial of critical care by a caretaker has occurred, but that the abuse is determined to be minor, isolated, and unlikely to reoccur. This report is kept at the local DHS office for 5 years and then sealed. However, if another abusive event involving the same caretaker occurs within 5 years, the second report will not be considered minor and isolated and will be forwarded to the Central Abuse Registry for 10 years and then sealed. Finally, if the investigation of dependent adult abuse is classified as unfounded, it means that the investigator determined that less than 50% of the information gathered did not substantiate the claim. In other words, the investigator concluded the abuse did not happen. This report is kept in the Central Abuse Registry for 1 year and then sealed. The Central Abuse Registry is where all reports of dependent adult abuse are stored. It contains the names of all abusers. Employers who provide human services must perform background checks, including verifying that the names of potential employees are not on this list. After the abuse has been investigated, the Department of Human Services can make legal or non-legal referrals. Legal interventions require the assistance of the county attorney, who will ask the judge to order the acceptance of a legal intervention. The judge may or may not agree with the need for a legal referral. Non-legal interventions may, at any time, be accepted or refused by the dependent adult or the caretaker. Examples of legal referrals include guardianship. When the concern is for the dependent adult's life rather than the adult's property, a person may seek guardianship appointment to provide for the legal sanction of moving the adult or protecting the adult. In the absence of such legal action, no one has the right to physically relocate an adult against the adult's will. The appointment of a guardian does not mean the ward is of unsound mind. Conservatorship. A conservatorship is a court-authorized relationship whereby one person assumes the responsibility for the custody and control of the property of another. The person to whom custody of the property is awarded is called a conservator. The person over whose property custody is granted is called a ward. The appointment of a conservator means that the ward is either under legal age or, by reason of mental, physical, or other incapacity, is unable to make or carry out important decisions concerning the ward's financial affairs. It does not mean that the ward is of unsound mind. Mental or substance commitment. A person who is seriously mentally impaired or is a chronic substance abuser and is believed to be a danger to self or others may be involuntarily committed to a facility. Examples of non-legal referrals that a dependent adult may, at any time, accept or refuse include Meals on Wheels, financial assistance, home health aid assistance, and adult day services. And there are other legal consequences to consider. The Department of Human Services and/or the Department of Inspections and Appeals can also work with the district court to criminally prosecute the offending caretaker. Caretakers who are found guilty of committing dependent adult abuse face serious legal consequences in time served and fines. Maximum sentences vary by severity of the crime. If found guilty of non-support and neglect, for example, that serious misdemeanor carries a jail sentence of 1 year and a fine of $1,500. As a Class C felony, it carries a jail sentence of 10 years and $10,000. If found guilty of assault, that misdemeanor carries a jail sentence of 30 days and $100 up to 2 years and $5,000. If found guilty of theft, that simple misdemeanor carries a jail sentence of 30 days and a fine of $100, but the Class C felony carries a jail sentence of 10 years and $10,000. And if found guilty of sexual abuse, that serious misdemeanor carries a jail sentence of 1 year and $1,500. As a Class A felony, it carries life imprisonment. Part 7. Preventing Abuse. It can be frustrating working in a long-term care facility. Severely ill residents, high staff turnover, and cultural differences can all compound problems in the personal lives of healthcare workers. Here are a few suggestions which may help minimize the frustration and decrease the potential for caretaker abuse. Know residents' rights. Know caretaker rights and responsibilities. Seek support from an employer, such as through an Employee Assistance Program or EAP. Seek support and education from local professional and service organizations. Finally, know your limits and breaking points. Look out for dependent or older family members, friends, and neighbors who are in or entering high-risk situations. Older adults should be aware of the dangers inherent in such situations. The following circumstances increase the likelihood of abuse. Risk factors with the caretaker. The caretaker has a history of violence. Past violence may predict future abuse, particularly among spouses. The caretaker has a history of substance abuse. Abusing oneself may lead to abusing others. The caretaker is dependent on an older adult for housing or finances. He or she may attempt to obtain resources from the older adult. The caretaker is mentally ill. This may lead to abusive behavior. The caretaker is under stress, such as financial problems, marital problems, or heavy family responsibilities. This increases the likelihood of abusive behavior. Risk factors for the dependent adult. The older adult has a cognitive impairment. This may cause severe frustration for the caretaker. The older adult lives in social isolation. This reduces the likelihood that abuse will be detected. The older adult lives with the caretaker. Living together allows a greater chance for tension and confrontation. The older adult has a physical impairment. This reduces the older adult's ability to get help if and when attacked. Spotting abuse early protects dependent adults, so pay attention. Watch for the following warning signs from your family members, friends, neighbors, and residents. Does the dependent adult experience pain on touching, have eye problems, have unusually poor hygiene, have any unlikely injuries, often seem confused or depressed, often refuse visitors. Has the dependent adult been overmedicated, experienced any sudden weight loss, been refusing services or denying problems? These warning signs may indicate abuse. In addition, watch for the following warning signs from a caretaker. Is the caretaker evasive about financial arrangements? Does the caretaker treat the adult in a childlike manner? Is the caretaker always present during visits? Does the caretaker stop the dependent or older adult from seeing people? These warning signs may signal abuse. The following 10 tips suggest actions designed to prevent abuse and to help the family and caretaker develop effective coping mechanisms and support systems. Assess the person for signs of abuse or neglect. Early identification is essential to break a pattern of abuse or neglect. Assess the family at risk for abuse or neglect and intervene as necessary before abuse occurs. Prevention through identification of high-risk families can prevent abuse or neglect from happening. Develop a trusting relationship with the older adult and their relatives. This promotes open discussion of difficulties. Offer guidance in caregiving. The caretaker may lack information on how to properly care for the person. Provide information about community resources and alternative living arrangements before an older person moves in with an adult child. Knowledge of options and services can help avoid situations which may lead to abuse. Encourage the caretaker to join a self-help group or to utilize respite services. Discussion groups provide education and support. They also help to relieve frustration. Emphasize the importance of social involvement. Using multiple support sources lessens the caretaker's responsibilities and increases the older adult's sense of independence. Report suspected abuse accurately. Use direct quotes and give specific descriptions of physical findings. Sketches and photographs of injuries may be extremely helpful. Accurate and comprehensive documentation is essential for diagnosis and intervention by legal or social services. Finally, consult a social worker about referring the person to community agencies or providing alternative living arrangements. This encourages the older adult to choose formal support services that maximize their independence and enhance their well-being. The dependent or older adult may need to consider relocation in order to prevent abuse or neglect. If appropriate, suggest alternative living arrangements, such as with relatives, friends, or in a boarding home, retirement community, or healthcare facility. Congratulations! You have completed Part 3 of Dependent Adult Abuse for Mandatory Reporters. When you're ready, continue on with Part 4, and when you have completed the entire course, you will be able to take the quiz.